Walter Hartwell White was an American chemist, school teacher, and narcotics distributor from Albuquerque, New Mexico. His drug empire became the largest meth operation, becoming even bigger than that of Gustavo Fring and the cartel. Before he decided to involve himself in the drug business, Walter worked as a high school chemistry teacher and had a second job at a car wash to financially support his family. But after being diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, he decided to produce highly pure methamphetamine to ensure his family's financial stability after his death. When Walter is invited by his DEA agent, brother-in-law, Hank Schrader, to accompany him on a raid on a methamphetamine lab and see how he works, Walt sees Jesse Pinkman, his former student, and finds out he's a meth dealer and manufacturer known as Captain Cook. Unfamiliar with the drug trade, he blackmails Jesse into helping him enter the meth manufacturing business and distribute the meth he will produce. The first person Walter kills is Crazy Eight's cousin. When Walt and Jesse try to sell their product to Crazy Eight and his cousin Emilio, Emilio says Walt is an undercover cop, and they attempt to kill him. He manages to gas them and leaves them to suffocate in the RV before driving away with Jesse. After Walt and Jesse tie up Crazy Eight in Jesse's basement, they flip a coin and decide Jesse should dispose off Emilio's body. But Jesse doesn't follow Walt's instructions, deciding to dissolve the dead body in a bathtub of hydrofluoric acid. The acid destroys the tub and the floor, spilling the contents. Walt doesn't want to kill Crazy Eight and tries to look for reasons why he should let him leave, but he's scared he'll kill his entire family. Still, he's unable to bring himself to kill him and starts feeding him. After Walt passes out briefly when bringing food to Crazy Eight and breaking a plate, Crazy Eight takes a piece and wants to use it to kill him when he gets released. Walter realizes this and has no choice but to kill him by chalking him to death. Because of what he had to do, he decides to stop producing meth. Walt and Skylar go to the birthday party of his old friend Elliot Schwartz, who was a fellow co-founder of Gray Matter Technologies, with his wife Gretchen Schwartz, who is also Walt's ex-girlfriend. Walt and Elliot talk about the old days and he offers him a job in the company because of his ego. Walt declines. Elliot knows about Walt's cancer and says the job will offer life insurance. When they leave the party, Walter is angry at Skylar for asking for help from Elliot. Walter also refuses to accept help from Hank and decides to return to making meth and to pay for the treatment. He will tell his family that the money he got is actually from Elliot. Jesse goes out to sell the product, but Walt is not happy with how he's distributing. He says they need a distributor to move their product in wholesale. Jesse, through his friend Skinny Pete, decides to meet a drug distributor, Tuco Salamanca. When Jesse goes to meet with Tuco, Tuco refuses to pay him and assaults him, sending him to the hospital. Walter asks Skinny Pete to tell him everything he knows about Tuco. He confronts Tuco demanding payment using the name Heisenberg. Tuco isn't intimidated at all by Walt, but he detonates an explosive, destroying the top floor of the building and forcing Tuco to pay up. They also agree to continue doing business. Soon, Walt and Jesse struggle to produce the large amount of meth they promised Tuco. Walt decides, instead of using the pseudoephedrine to produce large quantities, they will instead use methylamine. He gives Jesse a list of what to buy. Jesse can't get the methylamine, so they cover their faces with wool masks and break into a warehouse, where they steal a large barrel of methylamine. They bring the promised amount of meth to Tuco, but during the meeting, one of Tuco's men says something, and Tuco beats him until he's severely injured and unconscious. Walt and Jesse see how unstable Tuco is, as he orders him to save the dying man's life. After experiencing his anger and realizing how dangerous he is, Jesse tells Walt he has seen Tuco's black SUV going up and down his street, but Walt thinks it's just paranoia. But when he sees a black SUV parked just down the block from his house, they realize they'll have to kill Tuco before he eventually kills them. Walt suggests using ricin to poison Tuco. However, Tuco puts a gun to Jesse's head, forces him to drive to Walt's house, and kidnaps them. Walt and Jesse are held in the desert, where he's keeping Hector Salamanca. Tuco doesn't want to get arrested by the DEA and wants to go with them to Mexico, where he will force them to continue producing meth for the Salamancas. Walt tries to feed Tuco the poison he prepared, but he's unsuccessful. As Hank tries to track him down, a furious Hector informs Tuco the two have done something, and Tuco wants to kill Jesse. Walter tells him they were attempting to poison him. Jesse hits him with a rock and he drops his rifle. Walt picks the weapon, but he can't shoot Tuco without the risk of killing Jesse. Tuco starts to beat Jesse, but he reaches for the handgun in the back of Tuco's jeans. and shoots. Hank then shows up, and following a firefight, Tuco is shot dead. To explain where they have been, Walter goes to a supermarket and takes off his clothes. He is hospitalized and says he doesn't remember what happened and where he has been for the last few days. Jesse is captured by the DEA. He says he spent the weekend with a prostitute. When Badger is arrested by the police, they decide to consult Saul Goodman with Walt, telling him he's Badger's uncle. Saul initially advises them to tell Badger to give up Heisenberg, but Walt and Jesse kidnap him and force him to help them. After looking at the situation, Saul says, "Somebody's going to prison. It's just a matter of who." So they use James Kilkelly, a bald ex-convict, who is willing to be imprisoned as Heisenberg for a fee. After this, Saul asks to become Walt and Jesse's lawyer and tells him if he wants to make more money and keep the money that he makes, he has to call him. After suffering several setbacks in their distribution, Saul proposes new distribution method, introducing them to Gus Fring. However, Fring gets concerned about Jesse's drug problem. Walt receives an order for a distribution on the same day Skylar goes into labor and gets mad at Jesse, having had to deliver the supply and miss the birth of his daughter. When Jesse confronts Walt and demands his share, Walt tells him he won't give him money until he becomes sober. But Jane decides blackmailing Walt will make him pay up. When Walt goes to Jesse's to help him break his addiction, he shakes Jesse, accidentally knocking Jane on her back. As Jane begins to overdose, Walter decides not to save her, realizing that if he allows her to leave, she and Jesse will only continue to use drugs. Her death might scare Jesse, and he might act on his drug problem. After Jane's death, Walt contacts Saul Goodman, who sends Mike to handle everything and prevent Jesse from getting in trouble. Because of Jane's death, Jane's father, Donald, who works as an air traffic controller, becomes distracted by the grief over his daughter's death and negligently causes a mid-air collision, killing a lot of people and resulting in debris and human remains raining down onto Walter White's house. Skylar decides to leave Walt because of his behavior and moves out with their son and newborn daughter. Gas saves Walter's life by telling the Salamanca twins to attack Hank instead, but he also tips off Hank, leading to their death. When Hank tells Walt about the investigation, he talks about Jesse and the RV, so Walter decides to destroy it and narrowly survives being caught by Hank. Walter makes Jesse to drop his charges against Hank for assaulting him and landing him in the hospital by convincing Gas to allow him work with Jesse. When Jesse seeks vengeance against the guys who killed his girlfriend's son, Walter intervenes and kills the two guys with a vehicle. He tells Jesse to run before Fring gets him. Walt meets with Gas and Mike in the desert and says Jesse is hiding. Gus wants to kill Walt and replace him with Gale, so he brings back Gale to be Walt's lab assistant and learn from him. Walt comes up with a plan to save his and Jess's life. He tells Jesse to wait for Gale near his apartment with a gun. Gas has Mike and Victor kidnap Walt to kill him. They ask him to give up Jesse, but he orders him to kill Gale. Jesse enters the apartment and shoots him. Walt and Jesse are kept in the lab by Victor and Mike. When Gas arrives, he changes into a red lab suit. Walter tells Gas they killed Gale to save their lives and that killing him will leave him with no one who can produce the product. Gas is angry at Victor for making a mistake, so he slits Victor's throat with a box cutter and tells Walt and Jesse to get back to work. Hank reveals to Walt that he is consulting on a murder case and that evidence shows Gale cooked the high-grade blue meth that's been turning up. He's surprised at finding a Los Pollos Hermanos napkin in Gale's belongings. He was a vegan. Walt can't stand Gale taking the credit and being called a genius. Walt is still looking for a way to kill Gas and tells Jesse to poison Gas with the ricin he makes. Unfortunately, Jesse hesitates. Gus is able to fool the DEA, but Hank is still not convinced that he's innocent. Gas wants to eliminate Walt after being confident that Jesse can do the job, but Jesse won't allow Gas to kill him. Walt is taken to the desert to let him know he's fired. When Brock, Jesse's girlfriend's son, has a mysterious illness, Jesse searches the cigarette packs and realizes the ricin is gone. He confronts Walter, thinking he poisoned him to get revenge on Jesse, but Walter blames Gas and says he's doing this to make Jesse hate him and have him killed. Jesse decides to help Walt eliminate Gas. The best way to get him is when he visits Hector Salamanca. So Walter tells Hector to let him help kill Gas by hooking a homemade bomb to his wheelchair. When Gas arrives to confront Hector for speaking with the DEA, he detonates the bomb and kills him. Walter goes to the lab, saves Jesse by killing the guys guarding the lab, and they destroy the lab to prevent Hank from getting too close. However, it's revealed Walter actually poisoned the kid to get Jesse on his side. After Gas' death, Walt finds another place, and they start cooking again and working with Mike. But Mike has to leave to avoid the feds. Walter is worried about gas guys in prison. Mike paid them and told him they'll remain quiet. Walter is unconvinced and wants their names. Mike confronts Walter and tells him he's responsible for ruining everything, and Walt shoots him out of anger. He apologizes to Mike as he dies. Walt uses Todd's uncle, a leader of a white supremacist gang, to murder gas guys in prison. Jesse has also decided to leave the business. Hank sees a book of Walt Whitman poems with an inscription in it from Gale to Walt and realizes he's Heisenberg. Walt decides to hide his money. Before Jesse runs away, he realizes Walt manipulated him and poisoned the kid. And he's very angry. Hank gets Jesse, and he's ready to speak, so they use his information to get Huell to talk. They tell him Walt is killing people and stage a Jesse death photo with ground beef. So Huell starts talking. He says Walt buried the money in the desert, but he doesn't know the exact location. Walt is sent a fake photo, telling him they got his cash. They know this will send him running to the exact location of the money. Walter realizes it was a setup and thinks Jesse is here to kill him, so he calls Todd's uncle to come save his life and kill Jesse. However, he realizes Jesse was working with Walt and decides to call it off. He was already talking with Jesse on the phone and revealed everything. Walter is arrested by Hank, but Jack shows up. Unfortunately, Hank is shot. Walter pleads with them to not kill Hank, revealing he's his brother-in-law and that he'll pay them a lot of money. The group digs out all of his money and take it, but they leave one barrel for Walter. Instead of killing Jesse, they decide to have him cook for them. When Jesse tries to escape, Todd kills Jesse's girlfriend, and they threaten to kill Brock too if he ever tries to escape again. After knowing what Walt has done to Hank, Skylar and the family turn on him. After some time living in a cabin in the woods, Walt tries to give $9 million to his family, but they don't want his money. So he visits Gretchen and Elliot and gives them the money. He tells them to make sure his son receives the money. If they don't, he threatens to have them killed even after his death. After his 52nd birthday, Walt apologizes to Skylar, admitting that he started cooking meth for the family, but he kept doing it because he liked it. During a meeting with Lydia and Todd, he poisons Lydia with ricin. Then he goes to see Jack. After being shown Jesse, Walt tackles Jesse to the ground and uses himself as a human shield just as the M60 on his car activates. The gun kills all of Jack's men at the location. Jesse strangles Todd to death, and Walt walks up to Jack, pointing a gun at him. Jack tries to bargain by telling Walt he can give him his money back, but Walt shoots him in the head. Walter tells Jesse to shoot him and get his revenge, but Jesse says no, after looking at his wounds and knowing he's dying anyway. Walter later succumbs to his injuries, and his body is found by the police. During Breaking Bad, Walter White killed at least 30 people, including Emilio, Crazy 8, Jane, Gale shot on Walter's orders, the 2 guys he killed to save Jesse, the guys he killed while saving Jesse from the lab, Hector Salamanca, Tyrus, Gus Fring, Mike Ehrmantraut, the inmates, Jack and his gang, and Lydia. His actions also led to the deaths of hundreds, including the 167 people aboard the planes during the collision. As a result, he's responsible for the deaths of almost 300 people.